Hi, everyone, and welcome back to our podcast where we tackle the question often faced after a late autism diagnosis. What's next? I'm your host, Claire.
And I'm your other host, Heather. In this episode, we will focus on managing energy and burnout. And we have a neurodivergent professional, Corey from Three Sisters Consultancy, joining us today.
Thanks for coming along today. It's really great to have you here, Corey. We'll start with an introduction. Could you please let us know a little bit about yourself, including your experience of neurodivergence and what 3 things bring you joy?
Yes, absolutely. So on a personal level, I have ADHD and dyslexia. I'm on the waiting list for an autism assessment. It's highly debated whether I was just raised by autistic people and have autistic traits, and I'm traumatized, or whether it's actual autism. But, I'm sure the professionals will be able to tell me. But yes, I'm very neurodivergent. I've been a carer for my brother now for almost 2 decades. He turned 50 last week. He's autistic with a learning disability. My partner is autistic. I have a 4-year-old daughter who's autistic. The majority of my siblings are autistic. So I live very much in a neurodivergent world, which I prefer. On a professional level, I work for an organisation called Three Sisters Consultancy. So it is myself and my sister. So we are 2 sisters, and the idea is that you guys become the third sister for the day. So welcome to the family. And we deal with the intersection between disability and sexuality. That's where most of our work is around. So what we know is that often neurodivergent people with additional support needs in general, don't get the access to learning around sexual health, wellbeing, relationships, parenthood. So most of the time I spend working directly with young people on this topic. But actually more and more we're finding that we're working with young people on the topic of neurodiversity, because a lot of people have zero post-diagnostic support. So, for example, right now we're piloting an autistic girls group in a school, and this will be our 2nd round. So that's the part that I think I'm really interested in and fascinated about, because so many of the people that I support and that I work with are either newly diagnosed or late diagnosed, and they're exploring what that means to them and what their autism means to them. So that's kind of where I come from in my background.
What 3 things bring you most joy?
Okay, so I've written them down because I knew I would have to make a list. I think the first one is my daughter. So I have a beautiful 4-year-old. She looks like Merida. She's got big curly red hair. She's autistic. She got diagnosis at 3, which I know is really early. I think what brings joy right now with her is she's only started speaking recently, like very, very recently. So because she had a speech delay, she wasn't speaking for a while. So it's been like really exciting, and I feel very privileged that she gets to share more of her world with me. So that's been really fun. I also love listening to audiobooks. I am dyslexic, so I struggle with reading. But audiobooks have genuinely opened up a world for me. Specifically, I like science fiction. I like science fiction about new technologies. I like science fiction about space and meeting, it's called space operas is the genre. So meeting new species, and it allows me to, I think, escape from reality. And the third thing is genuinely learning about neurodiversity. It is my special interest, right? So I'm very lucky that my job is also my special interest. I know not a lot of people have that. And currently I'm interested in ADHD and the menopause and the link there, and also between neurodiversity and connective tissue disorders. So these are the things that bring me joy on a daily basis.
Executive functions are a set of mental skills including task initiation, planning, memory, flexible thinking, and self-control. Neurodivergent people, including autistic people, often report struggling with executive functioning as well as autistic inertia, which can be described as task paralysis or a mental and physical block that prevents us from starting tasks, even ones that we really want to do. Can you tell us about how you experience executive function or dysfunction?
Absolutely. I think as a neurodivergent person, this is by far my biggest challenge. Just existing. And I think, so what I've done is I've kind of broken it up. So for me, task initiation, like autistic inertia, it's debilitating, especially around physical transitions is something that I really struggle with. So things like getting out of the car when I arrive home or getting in a bath. I don't know how many times I have, and here's the thing, I love a bath. It's one of the things that soothes me most. It is a sensory seeking environment for me. I love it, but getting into that bath can be really, really challenging. And I think sometimes when you get stuck like that, it can feel quite scary because you almost feel trapped in your own body, and not feeling in control of your own body, as well as having issues with things like interoception, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, is definitely something that I experience. Planning is something I'm not good at, definitely not good at, but it's also something I have to do. And especially because I'm now self-employed and I'm a parent and I'm a carer. So, but I think for autistic people and neurodivergent people in general, I think planning takes up a lot more time and energy than for neurotypical people. So something like leaving the house, for neurotypical people is just, I'll just put some things in a bag and I'll go. But for myself, and I know for a lot of the people that I support, you're having to go through your day and think about, what am I going to do during that day? And then you're having to go back the way to figure out what you need. So often I will leave the house 4 or 5 times before I actually have everything I need. And once again, sometimes by the time I get to wherever I need to go, or even just getting into the car, I'm exhausted because I've done so many back and forths. So I think planning for executive functioning is something that I struggle with, and I know a lot of other people do. Memory-wise, my ADHD does not help with this, but my short-term memory is affected significantly. Not only by my neurodiversity, but I've also got a chronic illness and chronic pain. And I think a lot of neurodivergent people are in the same situation as well. So I'm not good at remembering things. I forget things a lot. And that includes reminding myself to not forget things, So sometimes the strategies I have in place to make sure I don't forget involve me remembering to tell myself I shouldn't forget something. So it can be a loop that is continuous, and can genuinely affect things like finances and professionally. It can make a difference too, forgetting to go to a meeting, forgetting to prep for a meeting, that kind of stuff. Flexible thinking, honestly, for me is something that I've had to get better at as an individual. I think because my daughter is incredibly routine orientated, and so is my partner, most of my family members, and they're all neurodivergent. I end up being the most flexible one because I think because I live quite chaotically, things go wrong quite a lot for me, so often I will miss the bus or I won't make a deadline. So I'm so used to getting things wrong and making mistakes. And that, can affect someone's self-esteem to be like that. But also it means that when there is a crisis or there is an unexpected change, for me, I can be the one that stays calm, or at least I can support the people around me to regulate themselves. So for me, that's how flexible thinking works. And self-control is certainly something I've had to very abruptly learn over the past 10 years. As a dopamine seeker, as most ADHD people are and a lot of autistic people are, and sensory seeking, we can make decisions. I'm thinking about things like financial decisions or planning to go somewhere or do something. And now that I have a physical disability, pacing is incredibly important for me. So for me, self-control is a lot of saying no and a lot of doing less than I want to. And that can be incredibly frustrating, and it affects my mental health, but it allows me to function as a human being. So as someone who's very demand avoidant, I resent having to have self-control. But if I don't have self-control in certain situations, in certain scenarios, it can be, at times catastrophic for me to not have that self-control. So yeah, it's a real struggle with executive functioning. I think for a lot of the people that I support, executive functioning is also the thing that exhausts them the most. It's the thing that affects them the most, and I totally understand why.
Thanks, Corey. I related to so much of what you said there. So thank you. That was such a good answer. Next question we've got is, So our group, what's next? We run, people often share advice and resources with one another that have helped them manage their executive functioning. So for example, some people use apps on their phone, or they'll use visual planners or tack on tasks. My favorite one is listening to music and doing as much as you can during that song. Loads of different tips and advice like this. Do you have any tips or resources of how you and the people you work with manage executive functioning?
I think when it comes to executive functioning, if it's not in my diary, it doesn't exist. And that's kind of a rule I have for myself. And if I don't put it in the diary at this very moment, then my brain doesn't know that it's going to happen. So when it comes to putting stuff in my diary, to the point where, I'll not only put in my diary, go to Specsavers and pick up your new glasses, I will put in the diary, get ready to go to Specsavers. Like, that is the level of micromanagement of myself that I have to do within my phone. I'm so glad I have a phone. Growing up, every single year for Christmas, my mum used to get me a calendar, like a physical paper calendar, and say to me, well, now you've got a calendar, you won't mess anything up, will you? And I'm like, that's not as simple as it is, because what would happen is I would have the calendar on my wall, but then I wouldn't have my calendar where I am. So technology, I think, is an absolute lifesaver for a lot of neurodivergent people. When it comes to technology, there's a couple of things that help. Does anyone use Goblin Tools or has heard of Goblin Tools before?
It comes up in the groups quite a bit.
Yeah, it's great. And when I'm genuinely feeling overwhelmed by even the simplest of tasks, I will put in there what to do, like what I need to do, and it really breaks it down and it allows you to tick it, so you get little hits of dopamine when you do that. So Goblin Tools has been really good, especially for things that maybe I haven't done before. So things like I bought a house a year ago and I found that incredibly overwhelming admin wise. So Goblin Tools helped me break down a lot of the tasks that I needed to do. So very useful. I also have an app called Visible that I recently got. It comes, you buy, oh good, okay, there you go, Claire's got one too. So I only had it for a couple of months, but actually it potentially saved my life a month ago. Because what it does is it tracks your heart rate, and you can learn about pacing yourself and learn about different parts of your day and how much energy it takes. And I was recently in hospital for a week, and actually looking back at that data from just before I went into hospital, my heart rate was very high for a long period of time. There were indicators along the way that now looking back and go, okay, well now I know how to prevent that. So sometimes technology doesn't necessarily help in the moment, but it helps us reflect after something has happened or after, an event. But also I have a thing I call future Corey. So sometimes future Corey will do something for past Corey. And what I mean by that is, for example, if I'm getting an energy drink to go in the car to do a long drive, I'll bring 2 energy drinks and I'll put one in my boot, and I immediately forget about it because object permanence is something that I really struggle with. But, 2-3 months down the line, when I'm rummaging through my car to find a drink because I'm incredibly thirsty and there are no shops around, actually past Corey helped future Corey and put something in there. Sometimes I'll do things like I'll find a fiver in my winter jacket because past Corey has given future Corey that little moment, or I'll have sunscreen in the car, or, there are lots of different ways. And I always am like, oh, thank you very much, past Corey. That was very kind to future Corey. So that's something I'm trying to do more and more because it's a wee esteem boost as well. It's a lovely wee moment with myself. So these are the things that I tend to use, certainly with the young people that I work with. Things like tack-on tasks are great. Visual planners make such a difference. A lot of the young people I work with struggle with the sensory issues around personal hygiene because we're not necessarily taught how to, for example, wash our hair. And there are so many steps involved in that. I remember very vividly being a teenager and getting a bit of shampoo stuck in my hair and I hadn't washed it out properly, and I just walked around with a big clump of shampoo in my hair all day, and I hated the feeling. And that was for me a learning curve of, okay, well, I actually do need to rinse it out properly. But for a lot of our young people, they might sit in the bath, or even adults, and they might stand in the shower, but don't necessarily know the executive functioning steps of pick up the shampoo, how much shampoo to put in your palm of your hand, And when I do work with, especially young people and young adults around this, they maybe don't realise how many steps are actually involved in things like showering or even making a cup of tea. And breaking that down can make it so much easier, because instead of having to think it through, you're simply following the list. So that's something that has worked so well with so many people that I work with.
Thanks, Corey. Yeah, my mum still gets me a calendar every year at Christmas. I have one, but I use my phone one, and the one on the wall just looks very pretty.
Yeah.
But no, those are some really great tips. Heather, I know you've got some good examples as well.
Yeah, I mean, quite similar to what Corey was saying. So I think that when we're overwhelmed with loads of different tasks, writing them down can just make such a difference, because it gets everything out of your head and puts them onto paper. But also verbally processing things really helps for me. So I, like, my husband knows that this is something I'll do, and it just helps me to process. If I just talk to him about all these tasks I've got, it helps to get them out of my head as well, and process. And then another thing is that people often advise to do the most difficult task first thing in the morning to get it out of the way. And I find that never works for me. Instead, building up momentum is what really helps. So doing a tiny little task in the morning, like making my bed or doing the dishwasher or making a cup of tea. Once I've started doing those tasks, it kind of builds up a wee bit of momentum where I can start doing bigger tasks like cleaning or housework or doing the work task that I've been putting off perhaps. So I feel like that momentum can be really helpful.
And I think you're right. I think sometimes when we look up or we try and think about, how are we supposed to manage our lives and do our tasks? If, we follow the examples that neurotypicals use, like, for example, do the hardest task first, that's actually can be incredibly overwhelming for us. And as you say, building momentum and actually building our self-worth in a way to get that stuff done. So absolutely, sometimes the tips that other people give us are actually fundamentally wrong for how our brains work.
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing I was going to mention is having music or an audiobook or YouTube videos on while I'm working or doing a task. It's really helpful for me. I think just having a bit of a distraction if it's a boring task, but also I tend to be quite sensory seeking when it comes to audio. And so I like having music or something on basically all of the time. And then the last thing is that I find it really difficult because I can hyperfixate on tasks to the point where I don't eat or drink, like I forget everything else. And in those situations, it's really helped me to set reminders on my phone to get up and take breaks. So that's where technology can be really helpful. But it can be hard to stick to that limit. And even when I'm on the breaks, my brain can still be thinking about the task because I'm hyperfixated. And there's an app I use called Forest, where you can set a timer and it'll grow a tree while you work. And so that can be really helpful for me as well.
That's so great. I think I would love something like that, something that shows the time passing in a positive way.
Spoon theory is a method used to explain the limited energy and mental capacity experienced by chronically ill, disabled, and neurodivergent people. And it illustrates how everyday tasks and situations can drain our energy, leaving us feeling depleted and then unable to cope with further ongoing demands. So for listeners who don't know how spoon theory works or maybe have never heard of it before, the concept was developed by Christine Miserendino in 2003 to explain her experience living with lupus. And she used spoons as a visual example of energy because she was at dinner with friends and they asked how her energy levels impact her, and she grabbed the spoons on the table as a visual example for them. So everyone starts their day with a set number of spoons, which is representative of your energy. And each daily task will cost you a different number of those spoons until they eventually run out. So for neurotypical and non-disabled people, basic tasks might not deplete any spoons at all. But for us, it could potentially deplete several, leaving us with reduced spoons or energy to expend later on other necessary tasks. So people prefer sometimes to envision a phone battery instead of spoons to represent their energy levels, because spoons doesn't resonate with everyone, and that's fine. And spoon theory can be really helpful, like you mentioned, Corey, before, about looking backwards to understand where maybe things became misaligned and maybe where your energy got lost before. I know that I found spoon theory really helpful when I discovered that I'm autistic. Also because, like you, Corey, I've got a chronic illness and physical disability as well. And so autism and my symptoms from those things all play with each other in ways that can be interesting and not always very fun. So spoon theory's really helped me kind of break down and understand my day, learn to pace. And like you, I'm using the Visible app, which I've only just started using. So I'm wondering, do you find that spoon theory is helpful for managing your energy and the people that you work with as well?
Absolutely. It's become essential for my life. I think when I first did become, I suppose, I started identifying as disabled. This was when I have something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, hypermobile type. So I went from being a full-time teacher, tutoring at night, I mean, honestly burning myself out, but didn't know this when I was 21, 22, to only being able to work part-time / not at all. And this was when I didn't have any responsibilities except from caring for my brother. So I had to almost relearn how to pace my life. And that's where the spoon theory came into place. I think it's a wonderful tool, but it does take some skill and it does take some self-reflection. And I think that's the part, as someone who struggles with executive function, that neurodivergent people really struggle with. So a key example I remember is I was working with a young woman. She was like 22 at the time, and actually it was her granddad. I've got permission to talk about her from her. So her granddad came to one of my sessions, and the more and more he talked about her, I was like, do you think she might be autistic? And she was in burnout at the time. She did get diagnosis not long after. Her granddad went privately, but for her, spoon theory helped her visualize why things were so much harder now. But also, and this is what I found in my life, it's helped other people around me understand my energy levels. So for her, what was really interesting is we'd looked at every single task she has to do, from having a bath to making her mum a cup of tea in the morning to cleaning her room, personal hygiene, even things like making herself a bowl of cereal. And she wasn't necessarily aware that things like making a cup of tea for 2 or 3 people in her family is exhausting for her, because executive functioning wise, she's having to do, we figured out how many steps that she has to make a cup of tea. And we really broke it down to, like, go into the kitchen, open the cupboard, pick out a mug. And for her, there were 34 steps to make a cup of tea. So by the time it was 3 people having a cup of tea, and she had to make them separately as well, she couldn't multitask doing it all at the same time. She found it incredible. She was exhausted. She was absolutely exhausted. And that was one of the first things she did in the morning. But for example, spending lots and lots of time in her special interest was 0 spoons. And going on nature walks and being in nature was 0 spoons. So we were able to say to her parents, who were brand new to autism and were really wanting to support their child, to say, I know for you, making a cup of tea is promoting her independent skills, but what Amna has figured out is actually making that cup of tea is the most tiring part of her morning. So can we maybe thinking about prioritizing other things rather than making that cup of tea? So spoon theory has been a great way for me to support other people to manage their own sense of time and priorities, but also I think it can help prioritize and help with that executive functioning part too. The Visible app I really, really like, because it'll say to me, oh, you've got to your points for the day. And things like these apps are great because they help you understand actually realistically what you can do and what you're able to do. It was funny when you were saying about the idea of a battery might be better, because when I was teaching my brother about spoon theory, I was hanging out with him, we were doing something, and he said, well, you're going to have soup for lunch. And I was like, why would I have soup? He's like, because then you'll get a spoon back. I was like, see that? There you go. It's a literal interpretation, right? So
I love that though. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Logically makes sense. And I was like, that's pretty solid. So with some people, we might use the term running out of battery and think about a percentage of battery that you have instead to represent that too. But genuinely, I can tell when I am in flare up, for example, with my chronic illness, or when I'm close to burnout, because I haven't been pacing my spoons. I think also with spoon theory, it's a great way to simplify the language. I think it can be really difficult to ask for help. It can be really difficult, especially if you struggle with alexithymia, like I do, of saying I am struggling, or I need help. But if I say I've run out of spoons, or I have 2 spoons left, it's immediately right, just go home then. There's a sense of understanding. Or, my sister might see me looking quite tired. Like this morning, my daughter was up at 4 and that was that, right? Like we were all up at 4. So she said to me, oh, how many spoons have you used today? Because she could see that I was visibly tired. So spoons can be a great shortcut for having those difficult conversations without having to physically say, I am struggling. So I really, really like it as a concept.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I think the reason I like spoons as well is because while a battery may resonate more with others because you plug it in and recharge it, with spoons you can be deficient and owing of spoons. So you might wake up one day negative spoons and you owe yourself to get to the baseline before, whereas once your phone battery's finished, it's finished. There's no continued depletion. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think, we talk about borrowing spoons. So I sometimes will, so for example, I try and work 3 days a week. I usually end up working 4 just because of my executive functioning. But on Fridays, I usually look after my daughter. But on Thursdays, I try and take some time to just sleep during the day because I'm conserving spoons, because tomorrow is going to be a high spoon day. So sometimes you can use spoons to think about that. But as you say, by the time it gets to Saturday afternoon for me, I've run out of all my spoons because I've spent all day the day before. We then, on a Saturday morning, we go on little adventures as a family. So by the time it gets to afternoon, no more spoons. So on Sunday, I need to sleep for 4 hours at the start of the day because I don't have those spoons. So absolutely, it can be a way to think about when you run over your spoons, but also conserving spoons and protecting spoons for future events.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last thing I'll say before I hand over to Heather is it often comes up in the groups that people feel really deflated or depressed or sad that what one might call basic tasks, and I say that in quotation marks, cost them so many spoons. Brushing your teeth or getting up in the morning or making a cup of tea, which is a great example, we might feel shouldn't cost us 2 spoons when it costs other people none. And so that can be quite a grief-filled concept. But I heard somebody speaking recently about how, they felt initially like their life got smaller once they understood that they're autistic. But over time, once they'd learned to pace, once they'd learned what works for them and what doesn't in terms of executive functioning, their world actually got so much bigger because they didn't have to mask and cope. They could thrive. And so it initially felt like their world was smaller, but actually once you know about this, once you process it, and once you learn and continue to learn, it opens so many doors and it can make things much more accessible to us.
Absolutely. I think I'm thinking about my daughter with that, because there are certain times of the week where she does 0. For example, on a Sunday morning when I'm sleeping, she's with her dad, but they're both autistic and they both just do nothing together. It's their time to rest. They sit and they vegetate in front of the telly, and it's the only time all week she's still. But we have figured out that if she has that time on Sunday morning, she can be more verbal in the afternoon. It means by Monday morning, she is more likely to go to her childminders. So absolutely agree with you. It can be harrowing to realize just how difficult the most basic tasks can be, but also it can give you a sense of reference and help you understand. It can help you plan for future you, and future you can really benefit from that.
That's great, Corey, thank you. In the What's Next groups, we encourage participants to work towards identifying what depletes their spoons and what replenishes their spoons. Unfortunately, the latter is often a foreign concept to many late realised autistic people who have lived until now fully masked and who have lost touch with what brings them joy. What sort of activities take up the most spoons for you, and what activities replenish your spoons?
I think this can be it's a really interesting question because it can be really, really difficult to figure out. So a key example is, until very recently, I thought my bedtime routine, which is very stringent, it takes an hour and a half and I have a certain way of doing things, was really restorative for me, and it helped me fall asleep. But actually spending some time being ill and then coming back and like learning from apps and technology and stuff, that's by far the most demanding part of my day physically. So something that's restorative to me in my soul, because I get to listen to my audiobook, and if I'm well enough, I get to take my dog on a walk, and I get to have a bath and play with the bubbles. All of those things might soothe my soul. They might help my mental health. Physically, they're incredibly demanding. I think I have to balance the physical side of pacing with my disability, with my parenting responsibilities, because that's something I didn't used to have to think about. And also cognitive function of just getting stuff done. And that, I'm not even talking about work, I'm talking about the ability to make a sandwich. Like, it's as simple as that. So for myself, things like peopling or socializing, interacting with people, especially when I have to mask, that is incredibly exhausting for me. Doing admin, doing the executive function of parenting, these all take up a lot of spoons. But ironically, that's trying to figure out that is executive functioning. We're struggling with how to learn how to manage our tasks, but actually we're not good at those tasks to begin with. But, I think when we also think of spoons in the traditional sense of spoon theory, it's about the physical strain. But actually for a lot of people, and this is, I know, something that I share, that a lot of autistic people have told me, especially women, they talk about how some of the things they do, like walking their dog or gardening, might physically harm them, but actually replenishes their spoons and replenishes their mental health. Because having some time for themselves, having some time to kind of step away from the realities of life and do something and be absorbed by something is incredibly healing and can restore our spoons, but by the end of it, we're exhausted. So, for example, for me, walking my dog, spending time in nature, these are the things that protect my mental well-being from burnout, but they can also cause burnout because physically they can damage me. So it's a perpetual cycle, I think, that can be really, really difficult to manage. And I know a lot of other people experience this as well, especially late diagnosed autistic people who, as you were saying, Claire and Heather, are learning to unmask and learning who they actually are. And part of that is about pacing and their ability to do things as themselves rather than as, a masked person.
How does your mind and body change alongside your energy capacity? I think this is a really fascinating one because I'm quite interested in the relationship between mind and body and how connected they actually are. And so I'm very interested to hear what you have to say on this.
I think there are lots of different aspects of this. I think one thing that comes up again and again and again with neurodivergent people, especially autistic people, talk about is how their sensory processing is impacted by their lack of spoons or by being in burnout or being overwhelmed. So a lot of people, and this is also backed by scientific evidence, is that a lot of people find that they are more sensory sensitive to things. They become more sensory avoidant rather than sensory seeking, but also less able to regulate when they are overstimulated. And they're, as I said, more likely to be sensory seekers or sensory avoidant. So, for example, for me, I have a 4-year-old who is a huge sensory seeker. We think she's also got ADHD as well. So most of the time I have to wear headphones inside of my house just to block out the noises, because I'm very easily overstimulated. But if I've had lots of rest and I've been pacing myself, I don't find her noise in any way disruptive. So that shows the difference it can make in what state you are. Also for me, I find clothing really, really challenging. And that's also something my daughter really struggles with, to the point where like it's probably the hardest part of our day is finding something she can wear. And the amount of time she spends masking at her childminders correlates very closely with how she's able to deal with clothing. To the point where on Monday, she's actually really flexible with what clothes she wears. But by Thursday, it's really, really challenging to even just get clothes on her body because of the sensory issues around that. So there is clearly a link between those two things. And I've noticed it even in myself as well. When it comes to some of the early physical symptoms of having low capacity, I think one of the first things people think about is fatigue. And fatigue is different to tiredness. Tiredness or sleepiness can mean, oh, I just need a nap and I'll feel better. But fatigue is when your body just feels like, someone described it to me as their body is going in slow motion. I think that was a great way of putting it. Their body and their brain are in slow motion. Another person described it as walking through soup. They feel like every single step feels like they're sludging through something and there's resistance all the time. So that can be a real symptom of low capacity. For myself, my body physically becomes slower, so I'm less able to walk. I become a lot more clumsy. And I know for a lot of neurodivergent and especially autistic people, proprioception is a good indicator of someone who's really struggling with a capacity. I was actually, when I was thinking about this, my partner sometimes will just tell me to go to bed because he can tell that, you know, there's literally no point in me doing the task because it's not going to work. And that's usually after I have spilled something or I have broken something. And it's because my proprioception is so, or I've bumped into something. And that's because my proprioception is so poor. Mentally, alexithymia can get much worse when you have low capacity. And that is ironic because actually what we need in that moment when we are struggling or we're near burnout or we're in burnout is we need to be able to reflect upon how we're feeling in the moment, which we can't do if we're not able to identify the feelings that are in our body. And so one of the things that I think is necessarily captured so much in research, but something that I found anecdotally, is numbness, the idea of feeling quite numb or even feeling quite like busy in their brains. One young person described to me as there are lots of bees in his brains and they're distracting him from the ability to do anything else, and they're very noisy. So I think mentally alexithymia can be an issue. For me, I lose a lot of my language. So when I'm in a lot of pain, when I have low capacity, I genuinely find myself using shorter phrases, communicating via text, that kind of stuff. And also the lack of ability to mask. And I think that can be quite scary for someone who has been masking for all of their life or uses masking as a survival tactic. You know, if you are in a job or you're not safe within your own household to unmask, and then you show your true self and it's not by choice, it's because you're burnt out or because you're at low capacity, I think that can be quite a scary feeling. And that's something that I think a lot of parents that I worked with have noticed. They've said, well, now my child rocks back and forth on the sofa for hours at a time and they didn't used to do that. And I think there's something wrong with it. I'm like, no, actually they're doing what their nervous system needs to do. But even for the child, they don't know why they're doing that or they don't know why that's helping them. So sometimes when we don't have control over when the mask drops, that can be an incredibly frightening process as well. And it's something that should be acknowledged as part of the mental health aspect of low capacity and burnout.
The next question carries on really nicely from your last answer. The question is, what are the signs that you need to recover your energy? And I know for me, that's taken a long time to establish. And even still today, it's a journey. Sometimes I still struggle to understand what's going on with me internally. And after years of therapy and support, I've learned how to be in touch with physical sensations within my body, which a lot of autistic people, myself included, until recently, don't know how to do. I remember somebody asked me, how does that emotion, I think it was an emotion, how does that emotion present in your body? And I was like, I don't know what you're asking me here. And they said, what do you feel in your body? And it took me years of practice and ongoing practice to know what that means. And I was supporting somebody recently from What's Next and asked them, and for them it was such an alien concept. And so I reminded them, it's an ongoing practice. It's something to do when you're feeling well, before you reach that state of burnout or losing capacity to do things because you're exhausted or overstimulated. Practice checking into a body scan. What do I feel in my body when you're feeling well? So that you get used to that mind-body connection. It's sometimes hard and sometimes you won't know, but for me, I sometimes go, oh, well, my chest feels brown or my legs feel purple. And that probably sounds even more bizarre to some of our listeners. But the reason I share that is because it doesn't always have to be what you might expect a feeling should be. It's a way to connect your mind to your body, and that will look different for everyone. So yeah, my sensory inputs change hugely. I become snappier when I don't mean to, and tone and communication is something a lot of autistic people struggle with. So I might be thinking I feel quite happy and comfortable, and then I've snapped at someone who I love, and that's not what I want to do. And that's a good signal for me, right? I'm approaching zero spoons. I am approaching burnout. And so those are signals to me that I need to recover my energy. But I don't know about you, Corey. What do you feel?
It's funny you were saying that. I also have synesthesia. So for people who don't have synesthesia, it's when your brain mixes up your senses. So for me, certain feelings have different tastes, certain sounds have different colors. And actually I was speaking to my partner about this because he's a loud sneezer. It's the most violent experience in the world, right? And for me, when he sneezes, it feels like there's a metal ball and it's just pushing through the air. Like there's real resistance. And it's very, I don't like it, right? But he obviously can't not sneeze. But it was very recently. In fact, it was to do with the hormones in the perimenopause. When he sneezed, the ball was going faster and it was bigger and it was much more overwhelming. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, so that's a normal sneeze for him. But my reaction to that sneeze and my reaction to that sensory input was significantly bigger. So it was an indicator for me that actually maybe I need to look in my body and think about my interoception. But it's really, really difficult to do. I think for the people that I've supported, and also I suppose for myself, a lot of it has been in reflection after the moment, because in the moment, interoception is so difficult. So like, I know I'm talking about when I was put in hospital, but I think that's a great example because it was recent as well, where I had a urinary tract infection, a UTI, and I didn't know I had one because I didn't have any of the symptoms. And then I didn't necessarily have a fever, and turns out that's to do with having Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So all of the signs that you're told about at the doctors of these are the ways to know that your body is not coping, none of them were there. So now what I'm having to do is sitting with my partner, sitting with my sister, who's also my best friend, and we're going to sit down and say, okay, what were the signs? Turns out the signs were, for example, sweating profusely at night. The signs were feeling panicked and feeling overwhelmed. Beta blockers no longer working to reduce my anxiety. So from now on, I'm going to have almost a checklist. And this time I'm going to be able to look at the checklist and go, okay, wait a minute. Well, I've got this symptom, I've got this symptom. It's time to go to the doctor for a blood test, because we don't want it to escalate in the way that it did before. But that involves having a support network, which I know a lot of autistic people don't have. It involves being able to self-reflect. It involves being able to have these conversations with the people around you as well. So sometimes the strategies that people do say you should put in place involves having other people supporting you with that, and not everybody has that. And I think that can feel quite isolating when you don't have that. But yeah, I think the lack of interoception is something that's really, really challenging for a lot of autistic people. So using apps like the pacing app that I use, looking at heart rate, that can make a difference as well. Seeing how many hours I actually slept, how many times I got up during the night. These are all different ways of trying to figure out what's going on. Therapy can be really useful if you find a therapist that works for you. It took me a while, but I've now been with my therapist for 5 years because she is also neurodivergent, and she gives me homework. I think that's really useful as well. And her homework is read your body and tell me what it says. And often the answer is, I don't know. And she's like, that's okay, we'll try again. But that's a privilege. It's a privilege to have the funds to do therapy. So yeah, for me, it's looking out for the signs, thinking about and pacing myself, realizing when I'm not pacing myself, and getting sick tends to be for me the first sign that I am at low capacity. And I think that's often the case for other people. Having a lower immune system can be a big trigger.
Thanks, Corey. I love that your therapist says, that's okay, we'll try again, because it can be so easy when, we're not good at something immediately, or it feels like it doesn't work for us, to panic and try and move on quickly. But actually, a lot of this takes an awful lot of practice, which is hard work. And I know I went through a period where I resented having to do so much work to learn myself, when I'd lived into adulthood thinking I knew who I was, and then to find out I'm autistic and everything that comes with that. But actually, it is okay, and we can keep trying. And it's an ongoing journey that is difficult, but that's also really exciting, that we've now got opportunity to make things really work for ourselves and live our best lives going forward. So that's such a good attitude she has. Yeah, definitely. But the next question is about autistic burnout. So I'm sure most of our listeners will know that autistic burnout refers to the extreme mental, physical, and emotional exhaustion experienced due to stress and demands of navigating a neurotypical world. However, it's often confused with the typical idea of burnout. The word burnout is thrown about so much in society today, which can make it hard to understand really what it is and if we are experiencing it. So could you please share with us what makes autistic burnout different from regular burnout, and how it might then present in different people of different genders and different backgrounds?
I think when it comes to burnout in the typical sense of it, we think of, oh, I've had a really rough week at work, or, oh my goodness, Christmas was such a nightmare. And for typical burnout, it might be that doing something fun, like going out into a nightclub or to a bar, or sleeping for 3 days and watching your favorite shows, these things can very quickly restore yourself and recover from burnout. But autistic burnout, as you've said, Claire, is a fundamental inability to live the life that you lived before. So it physically changes your capacity, it mentally changes your capacity, it emotionally changes your capacity. It's a whole body and mind experience, and it cannot be cured with rest. I think that's something that is the biggest thing that a lot of people who don't have burnout don't necessarily understand. If someone has autistic burnout, taking a week off work or not socializing for a week isn't necessarily going to support that. Sometimes for most people who have burnout, it takes weeks or months, sometimes even years, to come out of it. A lot of examples that I work with are young women or rather young girls, teenagers, who go into burnout during exam season. And a lot of girls then become non-attenders to school. We know there's a huge percentage of autistic people who don't attend school on a regular basis, or not as regular as neurotypical pupils. So that's a good example of that, of how exam stress, executive functioning around managing study time, the lack of routine, the lack of schedule, the pressure that a lot of people feel, the expectations people have of you, can cause burnout to the point where you can't get out of bed. And that is another difference, is that for autistic burnout, it's not, I just need to sit on the sofa for a week and vegetate and feel better. It's a fundamental difference in our ability to be ourselves. And that includes personality. Quite a lot of people will say that they lose their spark when they are burnt out. They lose their sense of self when they're burnt out, because who they are was very much linked to their ability to do stuff, to say stuff, to communicate, to think. And when you've got burnout, it can be really, really challenging. When it comes to genders, I'm going to talk very binary right now, but I do want to acknowledge that there are lots of different types of genders. That for a lot of girls, it can come from being highly masked. For a lot of males, it can come from the pressures of, for example, exams, stress. It can come from family expectations, for example. It can come from bullying and the expectations of what it means to be a male. I'm thinking about, red pill culture and that kind of stuff. That can all be interlinked as well. Culturally, it can be different as well. Some cultures don't have a word for burnout. They don't have a sense of that. When other cultures fully take on board the idea that actually rest is an incredibly important part, and recovery rather than rest is an incredibly important part. So culturally, there can be differences as well. I think also there's differences in hormonal aspects as well. So we know that, for example, a lot of perimenopausal and menopausal autistic women go into burnout because there's a extreme dip in the estrogen that they have, and that can affect their ability to executive function, have energy levels. So there's so many variables when it comes to what causes burnout, but also how it presents itself as well. So there's no one way to have autistic burnout, but we know that it fundamentally changes who you are and your ability to be the person that you usually are.
Yeah, thank you, Corey. That's such a good answer. And I think, like you say, there's no one way to be burnt out. It will look different for each of us. And so many things can make that a variable experience even each time we ourselves experience burnout. So it might not always look the same as last time. And it's a very complicated experience, and it comes up so much in our What's Next groups. So thank you for going through that with us and really clearly outlining the difference between regular burnout and the autistic experience of autistic burnout. It's a really important distinction.
We're often asked in the What's Next groups about how to manage burnout, especially from people who are perhaps parents, self-employed, or have other commitments that they cannot take a break from or have no support with. What can help when autistic people are experiencing burnout, and what can you do when you don't have the ability to rest and recover? And another thing that comes in here is, how can we avoid burnout as autistic people?
Things we've already talked about of how to prevent it, things like pacing, spoon theory, resting, prioritizing our sensory needs. That's something that a lot of autistic people have told me really helped them, is actually if they need to stop during the day to, for example, wash their hands with very cold water to reset their nervous system, that can help, or stopping in the middle of the day to rest physically, or to take a brain break and listen to an audiobook, that can make a difference as well. and looking out for the signs that you experience when you have burnout. But as we've said, that can be really, really challenging. But yeah, what can you do to rest and recover? This is really difficult because each person is so different. So I asked around, I asked the autistic people in my life, I looked at the research, spent a lot of time on Reddit as well. And I think one of the things that came up more than anything else, reduce as many demands as you can. And reducing the demands can be the tiniest of things. So examples that I've done in the past is laundry for me is something that is very demanding of me physically and executive functioning wise. So I get someone to pick up my laundry once every 2 weeks, and I put it in a massive IKEA bag, and it cost me £25. And sometimes I don't have that £25 and I have to make it work with other stuff, but it comes back to me folded and ironed and washed. I don't have to think about it. Even tiny things like using paper plates, because the idea of using a dishwasher is really overwhelming. Buying pre-cut veg, even though it's not necessarily that great for the environment, just to reduce the tiny demands that you have in your brain can make a difference. You know, if you're struggling with bathing yourself, having bathing wipes to use so that your body is to a certain extent cleaner than it was, and also you feel better, can make a difference. So one of the things that actually it was my therapist who says is sometimes self-care isn't fun. In fact, for a lot of people in burnout, self-care is the thing they resent doing most, but it can also be the most important thing. Because buying paper plates because washing dishes is overwhelming sensory-wise, that's self-care, right? Not having a bath for 3 days and using special wipes that help with that can be a type of self-care. That doesn't necessarily mean neglect. So reducing as many demands as possible can really make a difference. Asking for help, which is really difficult to do as someone who really struggles with that, because I think often, especially if we're late diagnosed, we can become hyper independent and we can feel we don't have the ability to ask for help or know when we need help. One of the things that a parent told me, and this is something that I say to myself a lot, is be a mediocre parent now so you can be a better parent long term. And I really, really love that. And I have tried to use that so much, you know. If I've had a really overstimulating day and I'm completely touched out, I will let my daughter go on a tablet for an hour and a half. That's what she wants to do. It regulates her. It allows me to regulate my nervous system. And it means by the time it comes to bedtime, I'm not as touched out and I can give her a cuddle before bed. So sometimes we have to be mediocre as individuals, especially as parents, as carers, in order to protect ourselves long term. Going to bed at 8 p.m. sometimes can be as simple as that, right? Going to bed early, and also feeding your soul. So finding ways to protect your soul and do things that you want to do, even if it is just listening to an audiobook or doing crochet, that can make a difference too.
I love that. Be a mediocre parent now so you can be a great one long term. And I think for parents who join our What's Next group, I hope that will be good to hear, because we hear a lot of feelings of guilt and shame around and feelings of being lost, how to look after themselves around burnout and around their autism and their needs. But I like to remind them, as I do everyone in our groups, that you are deserving of that self-care. We often feel like we're not, but absolutely, having wipes next to your sink, if you can't afford the energy to wash, you're deserving of feeling clean. So something as small as using wipes for a week, if that's what helps you, that's, like you say, it's not neglect, that's self-care. It's not always pretty, but you're deserving of those accommodations, of those experiences. So yeah, I think that's an amazing answer, and I'm going to take that forward myself as well. I'm not a parent, just a dog parent, but yeah, thank you for sharing that, Corey. The last question that we like to ask on the podcast is, what would you say to anyone figuring out today that they're autistic later in their life?
I think more than anything, be kind to yourself. I think it's a huge learning curve. It's okay to be angry at the world. I think for a lot of adults that I work with, they start to get angry that people haven't noticed for so long, that they've maybe not had their needs met, and they start to almost reflect a bit back on their life and think, how did you not notice that? How did you not notice that? My daughter is the spitting image of one of my siblings, and the way that she lives her life is very different to the way that my sibling lived her life, because she's been diagnosed and because her needs are being met, and my sibling didn't have that experience. So, it can be quite harrowing to go through your life and reflect on that and feeling angry about it, and that's totally okay. Some people experience regression or feeling more autistic, also completely fine. Sometimes having the permission or having the diagnosis, or even just realizing that you are autistic, don't gaslight yourself. It's okay that you become more autistic. It's okay that you struggle more with sensory needs, because sometimes your body just needed that permission to feel the way that it genuinely has felt all of your life. And the thing that I think someone said to me and that really made a difference for me is they said, the people in your life that love and like you, liked you before you knew you were autistic. Right? So being autistic doesn't make you any less lovable. It doesn't make you any less valuable. It doesn't make you any less just in general. And actually, the people in your life, even if they're not in your life now, loved you because you were autistic, right? Because it was fundamentally part of your personality, even if you didn't know it at the time. I think autistic people are great. They're my favorite type of people. I know where I stand with autistic people. Everything's clear. There's lots of routines. It makes sense to me. So you are loved, and you always have been loved.
That's a brilliant way to close, I think. You are loved, and you always have been loved, and you always will be loved. There's a huge autistic community out there, and we're biased at the National Autistic Society. Obviously, we also think autistic people are amazing, and they are, so yeah, you are loved and you're accepted, and amazing. Thank you so much, Corey. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast today.
It's been so much fun talking about my special interest. So thank you. And thank you for sharing your experiences too. And thank you for having me involved with your groups as well. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you everyone so much for listening. We'll see you all in the next episode.